Good. I am. Are you sure? Yes.
Yeah.
On the other side. Welcome everyone back to House General Housing. And it is still Tuesday, April 8th. We now are going to commence hearing and discussion of the possibility, the unfortunate possibility of federal funding cuts that both our agencies and as well as nonprofits are experiencing. And naturally, we're going to focus first on entities that address housing issues. So we've invited a number of people to come and speak. And this afternoon, we're going to hear from Polly Major from Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, Kathleen Burke, from Vermont State Housing Authority, Nate Formulary from, he's the commissioner of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and Maura Collins from VHFA. So, Polly, you're first. You want to state your name for the record and take it away? I think everyone who's testifying here, Nate, have you ever testified?
I have, yes.
But this year?
Yes.
Yes, all right. I think we're going to dispense with introducing each of you to the members of the committee because you've been here before. So welcome and take it away, Polly.
For the record, my name is Polly Major. I'm the Director of Policy and Special Projects for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And you've asked us here to talk today about the impact of federal cuts on Vermont's housing delivery system. And the way we support housing production for low and moderate income Vermonters and Vermonters' access to housing, it's a very integrated system. All of our agencies work very closely together to align our programs and to align our federal programs. So when we were contemplating this question of how do we, in a useful way, talk to the committee about how we anticipate federal cuts hitting Vermont's system, we wanted to work together and present you with one broad overview of the whole system and then provide you a little bit more nuanced detail of our individual programs. So that's why you're hearing from me for the first part of this testimony, and then you'll hear from the individual agencies to follow up on that. I volunteered to do this for the agencies because prior to working for VHCB, I both worked for USDA Rural Development, which is a federal agency that delivers housing dollars to the state, and for Senator Leahy when he chaired the Senate Appropriations Committee on housing policy for him. So I really closely followed all of these housing funding streams.
So what you're telling me is that your overheads here are, your slides are everybody's?
It's the overview. It's the
overview.
overview of the whole system. And then I know Kathleen has some additional.
So I'm going to view you guys as a panel. So we do not have individuals. We don't have enough chairs up front, but I'm going to view you as a panel. Also, what I'm going to do, it's a little unusual. Kathleen, would you just introduce yourself for the record right now from where you are?
Be happy to. Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Housing Authority. And if I may, I'd like to introduce two of my staff members.
Please. The reason for these introductions, by the way, is that way when members of the committee want to ask a question and Polly wants to say, well, someone else should answer it, you don't have to introduce yourself then. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bacon. I'm the Managing Director of the Housing Programs Administration Division, Vermont State Housing.
I'm Daniel Blankenship, Director of Homeless Programs.
Welcome. Okay, Nate, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Nate Formulary, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Our esteemed commissioner is out of town, so I'm filling in today.
You know, I want to.
But I appreciate it. I'll let him know.
Okay. And Laura,
Yep, Maura Collins, Executive Director of Vermont Housing Finance Agency.
right. Is there anyone else in the room who you know you're going to be answering questions?
You might want to hear from Gus.
Okay, Gus, you. Thank you. All right, yes, Elizabeth.
I have a question for you. Which is, are, or also all y'all. What I also would like to get at, besides what our governor's administration and the agencies are predicting, or what they're worried about. I'm also really worried about the nonprofits who are doing a lot of the work on the ground. And I don't know whether you can describe your relationship with them in such a way that or whether we are planning to have them in.
Both. I think that we're really worried about the nonprofits because it's our impression that they're kind of the leading and bleeding edge of this thing in terms of layoffs and program cuts, instant layoffs and program cuts.
Yeah.
So if you can elucidate, that's fine, and we will also be hearing from them. Holly, go ahead, please.
Speak to that as we go through. So having just said, we're gonna speak as a group to illustrate kind of the scale of what we're looking at and the unpredictable nature. I want to zoom into what it looked like at the end of January when we all saw an executive order halting federal funds. And I want to just zoom into what that looked like, what the impact it would be just on VHCB's programs alone. So we asked our housing program staff, what does it mean if we turn off the spigot to federal dollars? And the quick analysis they did was that we have 55.7 million in federal funds that have been committed but not yet dispersed to projects. So federal funds are reimbursing work that's done. That's $55 million in buildings that are being built or going to be built. That's 18 projects that are actively under construction, creating 567 units, of which 162 are for those experiencing homelessness. Then there's an additional 13 projects around the state that are yet to get under construction, relying on these federal funds.
I'm sorry, 18 projects, how many units?
567. 567. This is a snapshot moment of time at the end of last month. These numbers have changed, which is why it's not up behind me. We also administer a lead program that works with 2 contractors who employ 25 employees working to mitigate lead in homes across the state. Reimbursements for those people's work would halt, and funding flows through us for households living with HIV/AIDS, rental assistance, and services for those 17 households. That stopped as well in that moment. Now, a few days later, that EO was rolled back. But what that said to all of us was how unprecedented these times are, how unpredictable these times are, and how immediately they can hit our system. You asked us to really talk through 3 high-level questions with this committee. So I wanted to put them up here to guide the conversation. You asked the impact of the cuts on federal programs administered here in Vermont. So we're going to talk about them in terms of their impact on rental assistance, on housing production, and on services. You asked how they intersect with state funds and state programs. I have a chart that illustrates that, but it is a complicated question. And there's, to all of these, more we can say and more discussions we can have. And you've also asked us to talk about the impact of policy changes on our statute. That is the hardest one for us to predict until we see written policy change come from the executive branch or from Congress. It's really hard to understand how we need to change Vermont statute to adapt to that. So that is something that we're going to have to come back and talk to you more about when we see more actual changes come down from the federal government there. So I'm going to give an overview of the federal funds in Vermont's housing delivery system. Then to do a risk analysis, we're thinking about that as a timeline of when the funds might be decreased or disappear. So I'm going to walk through that, and then you're going to hear more from agency partners. And I think we should be open to questions at any time. We like to think about our housing delivery system, which again is how we build homes for Vermonters and how we help Vermonters access the homes through rental assistance. That's the system we're talking about here. We think about it as a 3-legged stool. We have rental assistance to help pay for those homes. We have capital for construction to do that unit generation. And then we have social services to help households succeed in housing. Each of these legs of the stool leverages and uses federal dollars. And they do so to varying extents and in different ways. So rental assistance, and this is something that Kathleen Burke from the State Housing Authority can talk to you about more. That when we look at FY24, which is the kind of charts that I'm relying on now, that result in about $81.1 million of federal funding coming into the state to directly help households afford their rent. And that's really heavily reliant on those federal funds. Capital for production, like unit generation, is a little different. We combine through VHCB, and DHCD administers some funds as well. We braid federal funds together with state dollars, and we use those state and federal dollars to then leverage the private equity generated through the low-income housing tax credit, which is the largest source of affordable housing production money in our system. So they're really essential in allowing us to unlock that tax credit program. And when we're talking about federal funds administered by our agency for production, we're looking at about 27.2 million in fiscal year 24. And what I'll say about that as well is when we talk about what is the proportion of federal funds in our either rental assistance or production or social services system, it's hard to say because the state number is fluctuating as well. And for capital for production for last year and this coming fiscal year, we did see a pretty dramatic decrease in state support for production as the state budget changed and has faced pressures. Then we're also looking at the social services, and that these programs are designed around Medicaid. That's the main federal source that's supporting those programs. And that's about 10.1 million. And that's also heavily reliant on general fund dollars as well. I will say there's some things that are not captured in these broad numbers. They're not capturing programs that are coming direct to the state through federal agencies. So you're not seeing capital for production that's flowing through USDA Rural Development or directly through HUD. And there might be other pieces as well there, but this is really the best we could pull together in the last several days. A key resource for you is the Vermont Housing Budget and Investment Report. This is a report that Nate's team pulls together every year that looks at the state and federal dollars that go into Vermont's housing delivery system and then is presented to the legislature. So that's why you're seeing 2024 numbers in this, because that's the most recent report we have. It's a report that looks at the prior fiscal year. So here, the chart on the left is an overview of the capital for production federal sources that we see coming to the state. And I apologize, this presentation is very heavy on acronyms, and I should have had a dictionary at the end. Oh, it looks like you might have one, Gail.
I have one, Allison. Want me to be the narrator?
The other thing that's not, so two things aren't captured by this report. One is those direct dollars coming into the state. The other is the dollars that are going directly to Burlington, which receives direct HUD allocations as well. But what you're getting is the bulk of the federal funding coming into the system, the vast majority, and it's going to tell you the impact of the system if any of these are withdrawn. So this is going to say how the state and federal dollars work together for housing construction. Maybe more detailed than you need now. I wanted to include it so that you have it as a reference. That's kind of ditto with all of these charts here. This chart is the state and federal sources that support services and rental assistance. What we want to do is talk through kind of potential impacts for this committee. if you're looking for the numbers, this is where what you can refer back to get those numbers. So as I said, each of these systems, the rental assistance service and production systems, are deeply integrated. We as agencies work together to align our programs and solve problems through something called the Housing Recovery Working Group that we established at the start of the pandemic to coordinate our state's response, the housing system's response to the pandemic. And so that group is the agencies here today, plus the Agency of Human Services is another really key partner. And so as we look to navigate future uncertain times, we're going to continue to work together as a group to do so. And the loss of federal funding in any of the branches of the delivery system is going to have an impact across the system. So some examples of what that might look like. If we lose capital for production, we are able to produce less affordable homes. We know that Vermonters who have a Section 8 voucher have a really hard time finding a place to live. If we're building fewer homes, that voucher might go unutilized and that family is not going to be housed. In order to serve households exiting homelessness, VHIP, which charges the fair market rate, a household exiting homelessness needs a voucher in order to afford the rent in a VHIP unit. Without vouchers, if those were pulled back, then those Vermonters exiting homelessness might not be able to access VHIP units. And without services, Vermonters might not succeed in housing, might not be able to sustain their tenancy, and that could lead to evictions. And being evicted could also mean that they wouldn't be able to access a voucher in the future. So you're really seeing an interconnected system here. So what does that look like for one housing project? Cambrian Rise is a public-private partnership in Burlington that you've heard us talk about before. The Burlington developer, Eric Farrell, had this vision for this really mixed community that has affordable housing in it and has market rate housing in it. He's partnered with Champlain Housing Trust and with Cathedral Square to build the affordable buildings, and then with others to build the market rate buildings. And this is a schematic of what it will look like when it is fully built out. There's a new rental building that will be built here, hopefully ready for occupancy in 2026. That's being developed by Champlain Housing Trust. That building's going to produce 40 new rental homes. 3 are going to be affordable to households at or below 30% AMI, so deeply affordable. 10 will be affordable to at or below 50% AMI, 23 to 60, 4 to 80. So you're seeing a mix, but all affordable and with some really deep affordability there. 10 of the homes there are going to be supported by project-based vouchers. So the vouchers that Kathleen and the PHAs, public housing authorities around the state administer, come in. Either they go directly to households or they're attached to the home, and whoever is in the home gets that rental benefit. And so there's 10 of those homes that have rental assistance attached. And then there's 10 homes that are designated for Vermonters exiting homelessness, and services are going to be available to the tenants at Champlain Housing Trust. So this is a great program, great project that leverages a lot of state and federal sources. And just as I'm going to say hypothetical about 5 times here, as a really hypothetical example, what does it look like to a project like this? Something we want to do, build homes that are deeply affordable. What does it look like to have federal funds pulled out of that funding stack? Again, this project is moving forward. Its funds have already been committed. This is hypothetical. This is how we're not going to be able to do projects like this so much in the future. So I very quickly highlighted in red either the direct federal funds or the kind of sources that are going to be impacted by federal funds. I think everything in this funding stack on the left could be in red here, actually. But what happens if you eliminate that rental assistance, that project-based rental assistance for those 10 units, you lower the building's ability to finance to have debt in their funding sort stack, because rental assistance adds to the operating budget. The operating budget is how a building pays for its debt. So you could potentially see a $2.7 million financing gap because of that lack of ability to leverage debt if you see the rental assistance pulled back. You go further and say if you eliminate the home and HTF programs, those are two federal housing production federal programs. If you take those away, you increase the financing gap there. If you need to have more debt to cover the gaps you have, then you have to raise the rents to increase that operating budget to pay for that debt. Higher debt service means you have less room in the operating budget to pay for services. So you dramatically change the type of project you're able to do. And the end result is you have to build a building that you have higher rents, that you're not able to have units set aside for households exiting homelessness because of those higher rents, and that you're not able to provide services. What federal dollars allow us to do is it allows us to do first stretch state dollars to do more across the state and to really deepen the affordability of the homes that we're building.
Polly, is this 23.5 million sources for the 40 units and the services?
For the 40 units, and then the services are out of the operating budget.
Okay, so
This is
the
like a
project
waterfall.
could go ahead. It has other sources. The project could go ahead. It just wouldn't have affordable housing or service.
This project is going ahead. I know Chris Donnelly is listening to me somewhere. But looking forward, we're going, without federal dollars, we are looking at not being able to build as much and not being able to have as much deeply affordable housing. You asked about the impact of nonprofits around the state. Vermont's housing and production system is really heavily reliant and designed around a network of affordable housing developers. We're unique nationwide in having this network that covers the entire state that's committed to building affordable housing throughout our state. That's a nonprofit network. And the business model for those nonprofits is in part designed around building new housing in the future and the kind of development fees that are generated through that production. And so their business model is going to need to change. Their operations will be threatened if they're not able to build as much because they're designed around building. And part of the HCB's statutory charge is to work with and strengthen with this network. So we're going to help them navigate that, but we absolutely see that as a threat and a threat to how we're able to both deliver permanently affordable housing across the state, but these are also the homeownership centers that administer VHIP as well.
So you're talking about Champlain Housing Trust, Evernorth, is Evernorth? They're a syndicator, but they would be impacted.
They would be impacted, yes.
And
It would be
Eagle Square and what else?
so Wyndham Winter Housing Trust,
Yeah.
Southeastern Vermont, Cornerstone Housing, which is a new organization that's merged operations in Bennington and Rutland, Addison Housing Works, Champlain Housing Trust, Cathedral Square, Rural Edge that serves communities throughout the Northeast Kingdom, Twin Pines Housing Trust, which serves the Upper Valley and Down Street Housing. There's a number of kind of smaller organizations too that serve really localized communities like Randolph Area Community Development Corporation. I have a map of these entities, not with me right now, but if that would be
I think
useful,
we've seen it.
you have seen it.
It's in our documents, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, this is sort of like in the best case scenario, we lose one piece of the, one leg of the stool. But where you showed us where we were at in January as a result of January potentially was all three legs are cut out from under us.
That's what zero looks like. And no one can predict what happens at the federal level right now. If we're heading to zero for our federal government, none of us can predict the outcomes there. But that kind of, you bring me to the next portion of what we want to talk about today, which is what is the risk for each of these funding sources? The way we're thinking about that is which sources could be put at risk by different congressional and executive branch actions in Washington. So I've created here a timeline and tried to match the funding sources with which congressional action can impact where they could be impacted. So it's starting a little back. It's starting back in March when we saw the continuing resolution pass. HUD EDI is a fancy term for earmarks, congressionally directed spending, and we've been receiving $10 to $20 million each year for the last several years through HUD EDI supporting projects around the state. That was zero because of the brought down to zero because of the continuing resolution. We also saw rental assistance receive a slight increase, but nowhere near the pace of the increase in rents nationwide, which means Kathleen's program has less capacity to fund additional vouchers moving forward. So we're already seeing that contracting in the capacity to fund rental assistance in the state. The next piece of legislation we're looking at is the reconciliation package, which is moving through Congress right now. And if they keep everything moving on time, I think we would see sometime this summer. What they're looking at doing is $5 trillion in tax cuts. And in order to pay for that, the Senate version has $1.5 trillion in programmatic cuts that they need to find. The House version has $4 trillion. So we see huge variability there, but both are going to need to really decrease mandatory spending programs, social service safety net programs in order to pay for those tax cuts. And so where we could see cuts to Medicaid would be in that package, or cuts to the rental assistance program, along with a whole host of other federal programs. So that's what we're watching this summer and following. Looking forward into the fall, Congress is going to need to pass a new federal budget. The end of the current continuing resolution is the end of September. So by October, we should have more clarity. But that's where we see the discretionary programs, where we see a lot of the capital for construction is in those discretionary programs. That's where those could be reduced or zeroed out. So that's the home program and HTF, which are administered through the HCB. And home, we know, is especially vulnerable right now. There's been a lot of critique of the program nationwide. And Congress is starting to hold hearings on the efficiency of HUD programs, and we expect there to be focus on that program. The community development block grant could be zeroed out or reduced, probably reduced, because it funds economic development as well as housing. So it's more bipartisan. Also, the rural development programs that I spoke about earlier, and other HUD programs like HUD 202, which funds elderly and disabled housing. So all of those could be decreased or zeroed out. Looking further out, we have the volatility in the markets, and Maura is going to brush off her crystal ball and talk about how that could impact the low-income housing tax credits and the value of those tax credits. Well, all of this is happening. We could have executive action like we saw in January, like we're continuing to see. And that can look like executive orders that really change how these programs operate, some of which might be deemed legal, some of which courts might hold up. We can see and are seeing really dramatic staffing cuts at agencies. That's one of the really big threats we're all looking at, because if there's not someone at a federal agency to push the button to get the reimbursement money out to a state and then out into a project, it doesn't matter how high that program is funded if it can't get through the agency infrastructure. We saw a couple days ago, or end of last week, that all the staff for the low-income heating assistance program, LIHEAP, being laid off. How is that program going to function without any staff? And then we're also seeing canceled contracts, especially those that are especially federal programs that were funded through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act, the reconciliation package of a couple of years ago. And so there's a fund in there, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that there were two projects in the state, preservation projects, that were looking at using those funds to help rehab affordable homes, and that source is no longer available. So a lot of variability, but we thought this was one way of laying out how we're trying to anticipate risk. And the big question with all of these is it zero? Is it a decrease? Or does it never happen?
Questions?
I'm going to turn it over to my partners and other agencies. Before I leave this seat, I just want to touch on what this looks like from HCB's, the funds we administer. So I put together a chart that I'm more kind of leaving with you again as a reference of the sources that we administer, how much we anticipated when we were projecting this year's budget, the populations that we see them hitting. And again, that's really at or below 60% AMI or really deeply affordable housing. And then when in that timeline do we expect that risk?
Sorry, could you walk us through, like, say, one of those lines, like?
Sure. I can walk you through the first line, which is, again, the one that's probably most at risk here. So the home funding, that's a block grant that was created, I believe, in the 1990s. To fund affordable housing production nationwide. It's a HUD program. VHCB administers the statewide allocation for home, and Burlington receives its own home allocation. So we receive the small state minimum for home. So it's been very stable funding at around $30 million a year. We braid this together with state dollars and use it to leverage tax credits to create affordable housing. And it funds households that are at and below 60% AMI. Moving into that third timeline section, we see a risk from staffing changes at home that could immediately impact our ability to administer those funds. We could see some changes in reconciliation where we're really worried about this program getting zeroed out or decreased is in the FY26 federal budget that would come into effect October 1st. The impact that will have in the state is that it will decrease our ability to leverage tax credits. Tax credits, like I said, are the largest source for affordable housing production, but they cannot pay for 100% of a building. They need either state dollars or other federal dollars to be in that funding stack. And as we decrease our state and federal dollars, we decrease our ability to utilize those tax credits. And Maura can talk more about that. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
The
nightmare is becoming clearer. If that's the unit of measurement of helpful.
Any of the members of the committee, before Polly leaves the witness stand, want to break through your depression and ask her a question? Polly, thank you.
I have a couple more slides.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're not done with the depression. I just want to touch on some things that we're doing to mitigate risk. We're working to commit federal funds into projects as quickly as possible. What we've seen is the more legally bound these funds are, to some extent, the more protected they are. So we're trying to get them into projects. We're trying to make disbursements as quickly as possible. And so we're expediting that drawdown of federal funds. We did that especially before we saw potential shutdown in March. So we wanted to draw down as many federal funds as possible. We're really trying to be flexible and creative. And then we're also maintaining a supplemental funding pool to ensure that projects can reach completion as we're doing all this work, we're also looking at the impacts that tariffs might have on project budgets. And we have a lot of funding moving through the housing system right now. It's going to produce a lot of homes that are going to be essential, especially if we head into a recession and low income households are especially hard hit. And so we need those homes to finish building out. We need that resource to be there available to people as we weather hard times to come. I also want to go through this slide, the impact of what we look like, what the withdrawal of federal funds will look like. It's going to look like fewer homes that are built around the state, fewer deeply affordable homes, an increased cost of construction because of tariffs. It's going to have an impact on Vermont households that are going to be more severely cost burdened. And that's going to impact the state's ability to move households out of homelessness. So as we're looking really across the system, we're looking at how do we prioritize the households that are going to be most impacted in the new economic environment. I shared a lot of grim outlooks with you, and I'm kind of an optimist by nature, and I'm not sure this is a moment for optimism. So maybe I'll just leave you with some commitments that I think will be echoed by my agency partners. That is, we're committed to working together and being flexible in how we administer these funds. We're committed to working with you and coming back and being as transparent as possible with what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and what we're trying to do to respond. And we're committed to serving the households that really rely on Vermont's housing system to stay housed and stay active in our economy and in our communities. That's where I'll leave you.
Thank you. Kathleen, are you next?
Such a somber conversation, huh? Thank you all. And Polly did a magnificent job. Thank you, Polly, for that great overview and really bringing together how our agencies work together, the sources of funding that come into the state to support our good work. I did provide to all of you a pretty nuanced memo. I'm not going to go through this entire memo, but you should have an electronic format as well. I'm going to review it. I'm going to review it with you, but I'll leave it with you because it's very nuanced, very in the weeds of really speaking to the work that the Vermont State Housing Authority does in this space. And again, the Vermont State Housing Authority administers about $81 million a year in rental assistance benefits. The main reason that we were created was to provide rental assistance benefits to low and very low income Vermonters throughout the state. And we do that. We serve approximately 9,000 households, inclusive of all the different programs that we administer. Now, I also want to remind this committee that there are 7 other housing authorities in Vermont. Vermont State Housing Authority works throughout the entire state. There are 7 local housing authorities. Burlington Housing Authority is the next largest housing agency in the state. And certainly when we talk about the funds that are coming through that each of our state agencies administer, it does not include the resources that come through those local housing authorities. But I did provide to this committee in the handout that I shared a fact sheet produced by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities that gives a really nice overview of the rental assistance programs that come to Vermont, including housing choice vouchers, public housing, Section 8 project-based vouchers. You heard Polly mention that and how important that resource is in really providing affordable housing units in new housing communities that are being developed with low-income housing tax credits and home funds and HTF program funds. This fact sheet also includes funds that come into the state to support elderly and disabled, as well as USDA rural development rental assistance. So again, this was as of 2023. But at that point in time, the value for Vermont was $132 million
In federal funds or?
federal funds. So again, Vermont State Housing Authority, we administer 81 million. That's our agency alone. And so I'm not going to repeat anything that Polly already said. I do want to express to the committee that this year, the remainder of fiscal year 25, we feel that Vermont State Housing Authority feels that we're in a pretty good position. As the committee likely knows, there was a continuing resolution that was passed mid-March, signed by the president, which in essence funded our Housing Choice Voucher program and our project-based rental assistance programs based on FY24 appropriations with a small increase. Now, we don't know yet what that increase is, but theoretically that increase will fund all families served as of the passage of the continuing resolution, which was, I believe, was March 14th. So that inflation would account for some increases in housing. That said, our projections for the Housing Choice Voucher program for this year, based on the funding that has been allocated, is that we will serve 300 fewer families than we served the prior year. Okay. Which is significant, and that's just our agency alone. If that is our narrative, I'm certain that Burlington Housing Authority has a story to share as well.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just to clarify, so you're saying if you get the level funding, 24 funding for next, you're looking at losing support for 300 families.
That's
300
right. So
individuals or households or individuals, sorry.
These are households.
Wow.
Many more individuals. And so what the continuing resolution did in part was we also had an appropriations bill that was a part of the continuing resolution. And that appropriations bill was that the Housing Choice Voucher program and the project-based rental assistance programs were funded based on fiscal year 24 appropriations with an anomaly. And what that means is with an increase. Now, Housing and Urban Development has 90 days from the passage of a continuing resolution to let us know what our final budget is. We have yet to know what our final budget is for this fiscal year. But so the numbers that I'm sharing with you, the 300 fewer families, for example, are based on what our projections are to date, based on what we know. Once we receive that final funding letter from Housing and Urban Development, then we'll be able to, analyze those numbers and do some additional modeling and hopefully confirm that our estimates are, or anyway, I'll stop there. We'll be able to confirm what our numbers will be.
Did you say 90 days after the reconciliation is signed? Okay, thank you.
So
But the 300 fewer families or households, is that, just following up on your question, are you talking about the continuing resolution, which would still result in a reduction of 300 families? Or is that your estimate of what would happen in the budget?
which will happen when?
In the budget,
The upcoming budget.
yeah, which is the 300 family loss?
No, the 300 families lost is this year. It's our FY25 budget. And so what I anticipate might happen for FY 26. As a colleague shared with me, my crystal ball, I think, has gone to Mars. And I'm sorry if anyone is offended by that comment, but I can't anticipate, I have very real concerns. And it's certainly something that we'll be tracking closely as we move forward in the months ahead. But I want to be clear with HUD programs. It's been many, many years since Congress has funded programs like the Housing Choice Voucher Program based on what is actually needed to fully fund the program. So for example, we have 4,067 vouchers under a contract with HUD. The number of vouchers that we can actually support based on congressional funding is 3,343 vouchers. And this is not a new problem. This is a problem that developed many years ago. It has to do with a federal funding formula, not something that this committee is going to be able to fix. But I wanted you to understand what's at play. The Housing Choice Voucher Program for years has been underfunded, and as a result, there's been a downward spiral in the number of families in Vermont that can be served through this program.
Is that because in that, unfortunately, I think there's very little that we're hearing today that we'll be able to fix in this committee. But is the underutilization of the housing vouchers, 4,600 versus 3,300, is that underutilization because there isn't the available housing for them?
No,
What is it?
there's not money in the checkbook, meaning Congress hasn't
Right.
appropriated funds needed, and so HUD has not allocated those funds
Yeah.
onto the Public Housing Authority to support those.
So the 4,600 is theoretical, like,
That's right.
right, yeah, okay.
That's right. And so I guess I also would like to emphasize again, that three-legged stool and our partnership with the other housing organizations that are here today. We have been a strong partner in supporting new affordable housing projects that are being built here in Vermont with low-income housing tax credits, with home dollars, with housing trust fund dollars. And those developers rely on a commitment for project-based vouchers to make those projects affordable. So as we go into a scenario over the next few years where likely funding to federal housing programs is going to be diminished, I'm very concerned about our ability to continue to commit project-based vouchers to this much needed housing portfolio.
Could you describe for the committee very briefly what a project-based voucher is?
So a project-based voucher is in essence a housing choice voucher that we have agreed to commit to a developer for a 20-year period of time. And so often when projects are being underwritten by VHCB and VHFA, there's a request by the developer. They come to us or a local housing authority and request a certain number of, we call them project-based vouchers because they're committed to the project for a 20-year term. And often those project-based vouchers are designated for the most needy households that live in those communities. Those at 50% of AMI and below, those at 30% of AMI and below, those exiting homelessness.
Do those vouchers result in the developer being able to put in their pro forma the net difference between the rental, fair market rent, and the rental of whatever they could pay at 60% of AMI?
Yeah, the developer, and correct me colleagues if I'm wrong, but the developer includes in their pro forma within the operating income an assumption of the rent that they're going to receive for those project-based voucher units. Did I get that right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is what helped, sorry.
Yeah,
Just
we're not as totally familiar with every housing program as we should.
it's very nuanced, it's very complicated. And so that is a initiative that I'm concerned about. And then the other piece, again, it relates back to the three-legged stool is, and outlined in my memo, we administer several what we call targeted funding initiatives that rely on a commitment of supportive services and case management services. And often those services are funded through Medicaid. We've heard Polly speak about that earlier. If the services are not there as part of the match for that type of housing resource, it's going to jeopardize the rental assistance. Okay, and so in my memo, I've outlined 5 or 6 different programs that we administer currently that rely on case management services often funded through Medicare. So again, another concern as we sort of continue to move forward and do this work. Yes, in wrapping up my piece, I don't have to remind this committee of these bullet points, but I'm going to. Reduce funding for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8, will lead to increased homelessness and housing instability, longer waiting lists and unmet need, increased rent burdens of families, difficulty in securing housing, lack of support, which are crucial for helping voucher households successfully secure and maintain housing. And I guess I don't want to speculate about FY26 and the years that follow, but on some level, it's responsible to do that. We have to anticipate what might be coming at us. And so the things that are on my radar to pay attention to as we look at 26 and beyond would be forced public housing authority actions such as rescinding vouchers from families that already receive them to comply with budget cuts, severe cuts in funding for housing vouchers, homelessness assistance, and other programs, ending housing assistance for people who don't meet work requirements. Now I'm starting to touch on some policy considerations of our new administration. Raising rents on tenants with low incomes. Currently, households receiving rental assistance pay approximately 30% of their income toward the rent. This likely would increase, this proposal if passed, would increase that 30% to some other larger number, 40 or 50% of the income. Eliminating mixed status family eligibility status. Now, this is something that's in play already. And what this relates to is federal Section 8 housing programs have been providing rental assistance to mixed families. Mixed families are made up of a family that has eligible citizens and ineligible non-citizens. And as a public housing authority, it's permissible to do that, but in determining the amount of rental assistance that that family receives, we have to calculate a prorated assistance payment based on the number of individuals in the household that are eligible citizens. So there's a movement to get rid of, to remove that provision entirely. And then lastly, eliminating housing first responses to homelessness. Housing First is a strategy that combines rental assistance with personalized supportive services, helping people become permanently housed. And so again, there's a movement afoot now to move away from Housing First practices that would be replaced with the requirement that individuals commit to receiving supportive services. So this is the speculative part of my testimony, but these are the kinds of policies that are being discussed by this administration. So in closing, I want to thank you. I welcome the opportunity to provide more information. At this point in time, we don't know a lot. We know what we know now. And as the months unfold, we'll likely know more. So with that,
Hey, come on. Thank you very much.
It's a very general
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
And I should remember this, but I do not. Can you remind me the time I know the fiscal year, federal fiscal year is off from our state fiscal year,
September 1st through October.
September through. That's why you're saying that it'll affect
That's right.
this 25 fiscal year,
Sorry, I
our
should
state,
have been clear, but that's right.
in case anyone is as confused as I was.
And
Just me.
every HUD program is a little different.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, fun,
So
spicy.
what you do for Kathleen's rental assistance program. Over the net. And the good news is we're gonna be later than that. Not a lot later, but
So early for some impacts, later for others. Okay.
Good afternoon, folks. I do want to echo what Kathleen started with, and that really appreciate Polly went over there for putting together that overview with us and for us. And I would just reiterate that I'm a little more than a year into the job and at DHCD, and the collaboration between these groups is real and appreciated. That we're kind of the only true state entity, if you will, in the administration. So appreciate that we're always at the table trying to work through this stuff. I'm going to just touch on two things. CDBG, give you a little bit of a reset on what that is and what it does. And then I'd like to touch on CDBG disaster recovery. We have some money coming through that program. And then talk a little bit about our interactions with HUD and how they're going. So, and I'm going to try to move quick because some of you may already know all this stuff. So the hand.
Real quick, sorry,
Yeah.
before I forget, could you possibly send this to Magali?
Absolutely.
So we can have it online.
Absolutely.
I much appreciate it.
Okay. So CDBG, DHCD has $7.4 million that comes to us through that program. And grants go out in 4 main areas, not all having straight housing outcomes. There's some economic development outcomes in others, but the types of grants are accessibility modification grants. So if a library needs to put in a wheelchair ramp or something like that, or town offices, we can help with those kinds of projects. There's planning grants, and I think this is important because when a community is thinking about a project, they can come to us to get up to $60,000 to plan that project before they go out to other funders with a fully baked plan. So we're there at the start very often to a lot of housing projects around the state. Then there's implementation grants, which are the bigger grants that go towards the construction of housing units. It could go towards rehabilitating housing units. It could go towards infrastructure for certain projects. And it could also go towards projects that assist in childcare and senior centers as well. And then the final category is called scattered sites. And these are generally smaller grants. And to your question about the nonprofits, this money goes to the homeownership organizations that were mentioned previously to help homeowners repair their homes, make repairs to their homes, rehabilitate their homes through loans. So those are kind of the four buckets of that program. One thing to note is our allocation from HUD hasn't changed since the 90s on this money. So $7 million used to go a lot further than it does now. So we try to prioritize where the impact is going to be because we don't have a ton of money to spend through this program. In terms of the Department of Housing, it's a division that runs this program. So it's 8 staff folks that are running this program, interacting with communities, technical assistance, getting them help for applications and things of that nature. To date, we have not heard of any reductions or any efforts to pull back money that we have committed. But similar to VHCB, we are trying to draw when we can and stay in front of it, encourage projects to be ready for that. But we have not had any outreach to say we're opening things up and looking to pull back committed dollars at this point, or uncommitted dollars that have already been allocated to the state. I guess I'll stay there. And I think one of our biggest concerns at this time, this changes, as you guys know, is around the HUD staff. That is where there are massive layoffs. And our concern is around being able to deliver these monies, not only in getting someone to push yes on drawing them down, but every year we have to create a grant agreement with HUD, getting that grant agreement reviewed, approved, so that we can even start getting applications in from local communities. So I think that's where our biggest concern is right now. We also work closely, HUD has regional offices. We work closely with the Boston office. At this point, it sounds like that staff is going to be reduced, but that office, again, this is today, that office is going to still be there, which is a great resource for us. Some of our team members have been at this for 20 and 30 years, so they have good connections there. And I would also say that at this time, when we are contacting HUD, we are getting pretty prompt responses from our contacts at the Boston office. And if they need to run it up the flagpole to DC and come back to us, we aren't seeing huge delays when we have questions and things of that nature. So let me just make sure okay. And now I wanted to switch back to are there questions on just regular CDBG? I know that's really fast and we can explain in more detail another time, but that's kind of the state.
I think you've been clear.
Okay. So switching to CDBG DR, which is disaster recovery funding. This happens after any federally declared disaster. Congress can allocate money and it generally comes through, one of the programs that can come through is CDBG. So in the wake of the flooding of 2023, disaster 4720 at FEMA, we were awarded $67.8 million in recovery dollars. The reason why I'm bringing it up in this context is it is our desire to spend a lot of that on housing. As these floods continue to happen, there's fewer and fewer places for people to go. So we're looking to focus that money over the next few years in housing.
How secure is our possession of that fund?
Well, it's unpredictable, of course, but I would say that we are feeling decent about it in that HUD is telling us to keep moving and move quickly and giving us they held a training for us to make sure that when we are submitting our action plan, which we'll be posting for public comment April 21st, we can let the committee know when we do that. They are giving advice for how to make sure that gets through, trying to keep things broad, not get too specific, and then let our applications be the specific part, let the action plan be broad. The other thing I would say on stability of the funding, HUD put out new guidance just 2 weeks ago on that money. And the update as they flagged it, you can read it and decide for yourself, was to streamline the funds and make sure that they're getting out more quickly. So we felt that was a positive indication that they're looking at that and they want it to move faster. And, there's also money from that allocation for North Carolina, Hawaii. Some of those states got like $1 billion. Hawaii got $1 billion for their wildfire. So there's a lot. It's not just a Vermont thing. There's a lot of different states that need to move that money.
Do you think there's any chance, I mean, when I hear an agency giving advice on how to spend their money quickly, I'm hearing staff feeling like the program is in danger and they want to get the money out the door while they can.
Well, we want to get the money out the door because there's people in need and disaster recovery. It's right now, it's really the only disaster recovery federal money that's moving is through this CDBG-DR. I mean, maybe others have insight, but USDA-RD, I don't believe has dollars already out. So we're looking to move fast. And when I say fast, I mean, by the end of the year, we'd like to have, grants and grant agreements with actual applicants in regions. It's really to make sure that we're addressing the need, which is great. And knowing that this is one of the only sources right now.
Have you been advised whether legally they have the ability to claw back part or all of the 67.8 million?
That has not been a conversation with HUD at this time.
Yes, go ahead, please, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you. When you write the grant application for the secure the $67.8 million, does it include the potential inflation from tariffs?
I would say that the money will not go as far.
Well,
But
yeah.
it,
I mean,
but it's not,
but how do you account for that in your application? Or do you just account for 67, or do you just request $67.8 million and then not worry about how many, not put it in the application, how many, how much that will cover? You just asking
Correct.
for the money.
so the action plan will look at how we're going to spend the money and in what categories. So we're going to allocate this much to housing, we're going to allocate this much to infrastructure, we're going to allocate this much to, well, I guess that'd be infrastructure, but culvert repairs, things like that. What housing units are we going to build, but not specifically where or how many units or what projects.
But the 67.8 million is an annual,
One time
one-time
for specific,
an event. Right.
specific to the 4720 event, which is summer 2023.
3. So is there a 2024?
Not at this time. Typically, there is a delay before these disaster recovery dollars come to pass. But we haven't heard any insight on if there'll be a 24 allocation. The other thing I guess I can share about it is that HUD also tells us where in the state, based on their FEMA data, we can put the dollars. So of the 67, 54 million needs to go to Washington County and the town of Johnson. And then 13 million is for the rest of the state. So we're in a tough spot there in terms of Southern Vermont and some of those communities that got hit in 23. And just in terms of the amount of money we have.
What is the relationship between this money and the applications, et cetera, that have been made to FEMA?
So like a public assistance application, this was separate money, but there is a duplication of benefit that we need to just be aware of and make sure we're keeping track of.
Other question?
Can I ask a
Go ahead, please.
question of the group in the room? And I apologize, I think my thoughts are just kind of catching up to me now. We've kind of talked about, staff are concerned. What about the individuals who are receiving Section 8? Are you hearing real concern from them about what they're going to do when?
Absolutely, and Liz is really shaking her head, yes,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna let her respond to
Thank
this.
you.
She's probably spoken to these people.
Yeah, I think we're getting nervous calls from our participants, from owners who are worried that they're not gonna get their rental assistance payments and how are they gonna pay their mortgages? folks are worried about losing their social security benefits and then how that'll impact their rent. So it's calmed down a bit, but I would say before the continuing resolution, people are really, really panicked.
Is there anything that you feel that we can do as a legislature to help educate or be a partner with you in, in that fear? Because I mean, I think at this table, we all feel that fear, but I think we're sometimes at a better place to understand that and understand where we actually are.
Sure, I think a lot of the media obviously fuels a lot of this panic, social media especially. I think what we've tried to say to folks is if we learn anything that will impact you, we will let you know. So if you don't hear from us,
That's a
things
good
are-
thing. Okay.
Exactly. So I think spreading that word is probably good, knowing that, the SHA will send you a letter if there's any concerns that your funding will change.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, just to follow up, I might add that if you're talking to constituents that are concerned, certainly refer them to us. And if you were asking in part that we stay in closer communication with you as we move through the next few months, we certainly can do that, so you have firsthand information.
I mean, I think that just for me, if there's anything I can do to like help aid that, because I know your jobs are so busy, like I reach out once a month if that's helpful, or if there's something that we can do, please just let me know or like.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, along those lines, I think all of us are sitting here going, like you hold way more knowledge. And are better positioned to come up with timelines, priorities. Like answering the most emergency things and, developing like a immediate, midterm and long-term planning. And it seems like already from what I've seen in my short time in this committee, there's a lot of collaboration and communication across all of, whatever part of the stool you're most responsible for. And so I would love some kind of recommendation as things come to light more, if it comes clearer whether, we need to shuffle, where the state dollars can possibly make any difference or policy changes. And if you've already, if that was the purpose of bringing folks in, or whether you're just trying to give us nightmares. And
All about nightmares.
We did discuss as a group that, as the summer and fall plays out, maybe there's a moment where this committee gets back together off session and we can give you the state of the state headed into the next session. I think right now it's, the uncertainty is.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I guess that's
So-
where I'm like, are we gonna need to do?
Yeah, I know this group is willing to give some sort of briefing as we get into the fall.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm sitting here thinking. We're gonna
Yeah.
have to deal with that.
We could even do it remotely.
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with an off-session report because obviously everything's gonna materialize. Not everything, unfortunately, but a lot during the time when the legislature isn't in session.
I just had one more thing and then it actually transitions to more well.
Okay,
That's helpful.
please go ahead.
I wanted to just thank the committee for the work you did on the housing bill and the appropriations you made because from where we sit at DHCD, funding things like VIAP and MER, that complements the scattered sites program that I talked about. And that complements helping keep people in their homes. And the infrastructure sustainability fund, if we were to lose those CDBG dollars, having that infrastructure fund at the state level is very helpful. So I know the appropriations committee chopped some of those up a little bit, but I want to just thank you guys for being at the table for that bill. And I think one of the other programs that helps is Morris at BHFA that you guys also fund. So I'll turn it over there.
Hey, thank you so much. Laura?
Anyone's testimony. No, I mean, is this someone's break? Is your?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm still Maura Collins at Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and so despite the fact that I like my reputation to be one of the numbers person, I'm gonna have very few numbers for you because by the time you get to the programs that VHFA administers, the crystal ball gets very murky and cloudy, but I'm gonna explain it to you. But my nature is one to always start with numbers, so I found a few numbers I do want to share. And the numbers are, who are we talking about who's living in this housing that we've been discussing? So Kathleen talked about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Section 8 program, and that does include these buildings that were built to be affordable housing, but they also include people living in other apartments where just the rent is subsidized. I'm going to talk about the buildings that were built with government money, tax credits specifically. Polly called that the largest program we have. And I just want to make sure everyone realizes the median income in Vermont is $82,000 right now. For renters, it's $43,000. For the residents of the buildings we're talking about here that are at risk of what we won't be creating if the money is cut from the federal government, their median income is $17,000 a month. And I'm good with numbers, so I promise that's right. A year.
The 38.
No, that tax credit housing goes up to 60% of median. I'm not telling you what 60% of median is. I'm talking about the actual incomes of the residents.
Right.
So they can earn up to 60% of median, but they actually only earn $17,000 a year. And that's in part because we all work so well together and all the PHAs in the state are putting these subsidies into the units. It's also because we layer the money together and it's not just tax credits, but we further subsidize it with state resources and the HUD money that Nate was talking about and that we've discussed. But 17 grand a year is what people are earning in this housing. We know that 46% of these households are over 65 years old. We know that 16% of the people have a disability. And 15% are led by someone who's not white, a racial minority.
Can you repeat that
How
number,
many?
please?
Sure, it's 16% have a disability. 46% have someone who's over 65 living in their apartment. And 15% are led by someone who's not white. So these are, I can't show you pictures of everyone who's assisted, but I gotta start with a few numbers of who we're talking about here.
These are tax credit units. Okay.
There's about 9,000 of those in the state of the 15,000 government assisted apartments that we have. Roughly. I'm rounding now.
Is there any overlap between these? I mean, there must be overlap between these three categories.
Of disabled, non-white, yes. So we each, as you can tell, we do so much together, but we're sort of showing up here and telling you about the programs that we administer. So that's what I'm going to focus on in my 5-10 minutes. So we administer the tax credit program. That's the big kahuna. The federal government set up this way. They want everyone to take advantage of tax credits and then layer in the other money from there. And I've talked to this committee before about how actually we call it tax credits, but there's two different types of tax credits. The really valuable ones, the automatic ones that the state gets a supply of, and then the ones that get triggered based on how the building's paid for. So for the really valuable ones, there's about $30 million a year.
This is the 4.
The 9%. It's about $30 million a year roughly that Vermont gets of those automatic tax credits. We get that much based on a formula. There's a small state minimum. When we award tax credits, the nonprofit goes and does fancy things to turn that into money and investors buy those tax credits. We're getting $30 million of private equity money to put toward building a building every year. On top of that, we have the other kind of tax credits, the 4% tax credits. That's going to fluctuate every year because those are kind of unlimited in Vermont. We're lucky. And that happens when a developer chooses to pay for half the building with tax exempt bonding. And if they choose to get a loan from VHFA using tax exempt bonding, they can get some tax credits. And normally, before the pandemic, before the state started really investing in housing in a major way, we didn't use a lot of those tax credits. And so in the 5 years prior to the pandemic, we saw, actually, let me not give you that number because it's going to confuse you. Can I start that sentence over again? In the 5 years prior to the pandemic, using those 4% tax credits, we did 634 apartments, but only 22 of them were newly constructed. It was one building with 22 units. Because those 4% credits prior to the pandemic were more often used in rehab, preservation, keep a building going. Building gets to be 30 years old, it needs a gut rehab, energy systems, all the things. We'd use these tax credits for it. But since the pandemic, ARPA money, state one-time general fund resources, a lot of resources was going to housing. So we were able to use those 4% tax credits more. It was a new source into our pie chart that we could add in. So from 2020 to 2024, we did over 1,300 apartments and 674 of them were new construction. So we finally were able to unlock a tool that we previously had not been able to use. And I'm not saying it was illegal to do it beforehand or there wasn't statute limitations. It was money. Money was the limit. So the message I have for you is when money's flowing, stuff gets done. Buildings get built and apartments for people who are living in deep poverty get created.
Because the buyers of the tax credit.
Because the buyers want to buy the tax credits and because the developer has enough money to fill that pie chart so that the project pencils. And there's enough money that if it's going to cost me $10 million to build this building, I can get $10 million from, frankly, all the people in the room. But when they can't get $10 million, they just don't do it. So there is not talk today about eliminating the federal tax credit programs. That's not what I'm hearing today. Thank you. But here's the storm I'm watching come across the lake, okay? I'm thinking if corporate tax rates go lower, then businesses are gonna be less likely to pay a lot for tax credits because they don't have so much tax liability. So why do you need a tax credit if corporate tax rates go down? And there is some talk about lowering tax rates further for corporations. We saw it happen in 2017. We saw the pricing on tax credits really drop off, and there's talk about that going again. One of my peers in Mississippi had a tax credit investor who was set to buy tax credits in affordable housing building. There was a signed HUD agreement that HUD was going to show up and put money in. I don't know which program, but one of these programs we've talked about, HUD said, yep, we're going to put money in. And the tax credit investor got scared that actually by the time that building gets built 18 months from now, I don't know that HUD money is going to be there, even though HUD said, I promise it'll be there 18 months from now. And so the tax credit investor said, hold on a minute. And I don't know which of these two, I either may not invest in this building or I may want to change the rate I told you. I told you I was going to pay you something and now I want to put some risk pricing in there.
I need a little help here.
Yep.
Let's say I'm a bank and under the CRA or whatever, I'm gonna buy $1 million in tax credits. And I do over 5 years.
No, this is a federal, so it's 10 years.
10 years, okay. So $100,000 a year. Well, no, I buy 900 and some thousand because of discounting. So it's 90,000 a year. Okay. Why would I care if tax rates go down as long as I have that much taxes? Would it make any difference to me? It's a dollar for dollar.
No, because you do care, because you're talking about what tax rates are gonna be 10 years from now. And so you're assuming you're gonna have $1 million tax liability. What if you don't have $1 million tax liability? What if they lower corporate tax rates and so you only owe 700,000 in taxes?
So the concern is it would apply to somebody who's maxing out or getting near maxing out their credits. But if I have $10 million a year in taxes and I'm going to buy $1 million of your credit, I don't really care, right?
You are assuming that paying their taxes is the only thing they could do with their money. The idea is that this also brings, yes, some of it is how much tax liability they have. It's also, I could take that $1 million and stick it in an investment tool and earn money on it and use that to pay my tax bill 8 years from now. And so looking at interest rates is also going to play in. So it gets very complicated quickly in terms of the math of what do I think my tax liability is going to be? How much could I earn through other vehicles? Where's the market going to be in 8 years? And the like.
But you're saying that however complicated it is, in a world in which corporate taxes goes down, we already know the market. Does the demand go down?
Yes.
Or does the price go down?
Both.
When the demand goes down, the price.
Well, but also sometimes the price just goes down and demand has stayed somewhat flat.
Okay.
There's been
thank you.
times when that's happened.
Can I ask a very silly question? A tariff cannot be construed as a tax if you.
I'm not authorized to answer that. I don't. But I don't know. I can tell you, I was gonna end with a little tariff thing. The estimates I'm hearing from the home builders is that 7.3% of residential construction materials are imported, according to the National Home Builders. And so they are estimating that tariffs could add between $7,500 and $25,000 to the cost to build a home. That's national data. So 7.3% of construction materials are imported, so that's going to add.
No. Have you heard one of the questions that was directed at me was, I'm wondering how real those numbers are, and here's why. It's true that we get timber from Canada. It's also true that we sell timber to Canada, and we won't if things get bad. It's also true that we sell timber to China. And I'm wondering if it could turn out that that the market for lumber softens rather than. Have you heard anything like this?
I have not heard it softening. What I heard was from a developer based in Vermont, who said that when the talk was that the lumber tariffs were going to be 25%, the domestic lumber yards everywhere raised their prices 24%, which is still under the 25%. So it's cheaper to buy local, but they price that in.
They price that up. Got
Even
it.
if it's not the right type of wood to build.
Yes, go ahead.
So on Friday, one of the other representatives whose husband has a construction business had said that between Wednesday and Friday, a piece of plywood, which cost $37.50, jumped to $78 within the 2 days. He has to absorb that with whatever work jobs he already has.
there is a Biden era policy, Build America, Buy America, that is in place for anything built with federal funds. So the affordable housing that's being built with federal funds has been baking in domestic pricing. That's not going to insulate it from the increases Maura talked about of domestic producers increasing their prices to stay at a little below the tariff price. But it is just an added layer of complexity to projecting how the tariffs will increase pricing for affordable housing production. And it could mean that we see slightly less cost increases than the private market might see.
Because we can't use, because under BABA,
Because
we
we've already
can't
started.
use, we've priced in domestic, we can't use foreign. Yes, Maura.
I don't have a lot of certainty of what's gonna happen. What I do know is that every time there's uncertainty, people raise prices. I mean, anyone bidding on a job, it's just common sense. I mean, you hear it from every, company. It's like, well, I'm bidding on a job that I won't even get the answer if my bid's accepted for a month. And then the job won't start for a month after that. And then it's gonna take, like I said, 16 months or more to build it. And we don't always have places to buy all the supplies for building and store it on site. And so what everyone's gonna just add to the costs at each step, every player is adding in a little hedge, a little reserve, a little buffer, a little, I don't know. And the tax credit marketplace is doing the same thing. So construction's gonna do it and the financing's gonna do it. Interest rates, we're all gonna sort of buffer. Okay, this loan's not gonna close for a few weeks, so I'm gonna put a little buffer in there. And so everything gets added together. If there was, if this weren't a marketplace, we could all sit around the table and be like, okay, let's just put in a 10% contingency that we all share and maybe 15% and go from there. That's not how it works. We all have to make these decisions separately. So the tax credit investors are doing it. The construction companies are doing it. All the subs are doing it. And so I am worried about the cost of housing continuing to increase.
Oh,
I'm not done. I didn't get far. I have more to say.
and
Because as much as in this moment, we are not talking about eliminating the federal program, and credit to our delegation who actually has co-sponsored legislation to increase the amount of tax credits that Vermont will get if that could pass Congress, which is in play. And that's a very active bill that has been introduced for years and has strong support in Congress. So, there's some rays of light here. There was a fire drill that we did in 2017 when the first Trump administration proposed tax cuts. One of the ways to pay for the tax cuts was to eliminate the tax exemption on the bonds that I've been in here talking about in the past. So I've talked about.
we wouldn't have tax-free bonds.
Correct. And so I've talked about how we borrow money and we lend out that money and we get it back, and VHFA lives off this spread in between the two. And the reason I don't have to pay my investors as much as a bank does is because our bonds are tax exempt. So they don't have to pay taxes on the interest rates that we're paying them. In 2017, there was a discussion about eliminating the tax exemption on bonds. We could still issue bonds, but they'll be taxable. We won't get a financial benefit for that. That's going to raise interest rates on the mortgages we do and on the permanent loans we do to affordable rental housing. That is back in the ether in the federal government. The Ways and Means Chairman put it on a list among a lot of other things of this is one way we could pay to extend the 2017 tax cuts further into the future, is to eliminate the tax exemption. But let me tell you, in 2017, it got people's attention because we're not just talking about housing. It's not the only tax exempt thing you can do. It's higher ed, it's hospitals, it's roads and bridges, it's the state of Vermont's bonding capacity. It's VITA and VSAC and the Vermont Bond Bank and all this. So again, this time, no one was caught flat-footed, and we've already met with our congressional delegation. There's already a lot of talk in DC. That's one that it depends on your mood about if you think there's a chance that might go away or not. But it is being discussed. And so I can tell you that last year, 70% of our mortgages, we used those tax exempt bonds on 70% of our mortgages. These are people who earn $72,000 a year, because these are people buying homes. And they bought homes around $245,000 on average. That's lower than the median price overall in Vermont is $360,000. So the homes that we finance are cheaper and for lower income folks. 64% of these folks got down payment assistance, and 19% of them were first generation buyers. So this is, if that tax exemption went away, those interest rates would go up. And that's where what we haven't talked about here, and I would just want to put in a plug for, is we've been talking a lot about rental housing for deeply affordable housing creation. We haven't gotten into the mortgage market and what storm clouds are overhead in that regard. So you mentioned the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA reform. That was something that does impact the interest in buying tax credits, but also has an impact on the lending that mortgage lenders do. There's also talk, if anyone remembers, Fannie Mae and
Members of the committee, she's referring to CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, which applies to banks, which incentivizes, doesn't require banks to make sort of public interesty investments. Just wanted to.
Yep. And so that hasn't been, those rules haven't been updated in a very long time. We went through a very long process, got all the rules updated, and they said, we'll put those into effect 2 years from now, because that's how you do good policy, is you give people a minute to read the 1,000 pages and all that. So that was going to go into effect, but there were lawsuits about it, because, when you change things about money, people get twitchy. And because there were lawsuits, that was the rationale of saying, like, you know what, we must not have done a good job reforming that. And so we're just going to start over and get rid of all that. So it's all over the place what's going on there. But the thing I'm more watching is that Fannie and Freddie, which is the secondary market, they're the ones who buy all them, not all, but they buy 70% of the mortgages that people are making. And these two entities were always private entities, but they're called government-sponsored entities. They're private. They price the risk of if those mortgages were going to succeed or fail into the mortgage rates they charged. And then 2008 happened and everything went down, and the federal government stepped in and said, I know they're private, and I know we said we weren't going to back them, but actually we're going to take them in and have them be a part of federal government. And for the last 16 years, they've been a part of the federal government since 2008. So there's long been talk of, like, we need to make them private again. So imagine what would happen, like, put on your investment hat and be like, it's a part of the federal government. And now we need to take these two entities that back 70% of the mortgages in the country, and we need to make them private again. Well, if you are not going to have the backing of the federal government, it means you have to price the risk into those private entities, right?
Every mortgage.
You have to raise fees, raise interest rates, because now they have to stand on their own. And so now the Trump administration has been clear that they do not want mortgage interest rates to rise. That they are like, we're not doing anything that's going to cause that. I don't know how you make something private and you'd have to go so slowly and do the things like I was saying, like say what you're going to do and then wait a while and let the markets calm down and then think about it again. It just has to be done so delicately. And I'm going to go on the record as saying what I would characterize the last 3 months have been is not delicate.
Yes.
So I am nervous that this may not be, I'm not saying that this doesn't have to happen. I think there's an argument to be made that actually these entities do need to be private again. I'm saying it has to be done with extreme care. And I have yet to see a plan of what that's gonna look like, but that's what I'm watching as well as all this HUD money and rural development money and all that is what's gonna happen there. I know that VHFA's rates for Freddie Mac, our fees have already increased, and Fannie Mae has told us it's a matter of time. On housing HFA loans like ours, nationally, we all got a better rate from Freddie and Fannie for the last many years. Lower fees that we could pass on to our borrowers. That's going away. Made it clear. HFA loans are the same as anyone else, and you don't get any rate advantage. So our fees will be going up. We've talked about staffing cuts, we've talked about tariffs, and I'm happy to talk about anything else.
It's just, because of the CARES Act, then you have to do all that. So if they became private again, then that requirement would go away?
Trying to think, the CARES Act, I'm thinking about the CARES funding.
No,
That we
the
got in
CARES
2020?
Act, I don't know. I just know when we go to court, we have to show that our mortgages are not part of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they call it the CARES Act.
Yeah, I'd have to, the CARES Act was huge. It was the first stimulus package that passed in 2020.
Yeah.
So I would have to look into what that's about before I could
I
really
really
answer.
don't know. They just want to know if the mortgage is held by either one of us.
Yeah.
Any further questions by the committee of Maura or anyone else in the room? Well, thank you all for such sustained good news.
Yeah, right.
Actually, seriously, thank you. I think obviously you've been very responsive to exactly what we needed. That is an introduction to exposure, sort of very preliminary thoughts about what could happen, very preliminary thoughts, not thoughts, actions you're taking to minimize risk. It's exactly what we needed. Thank you. I think the next sort of round is going to have two elements. One is, well, an update, what's happened. And another is going to be starting to get your thoughts on what, if anything, the state can do. I think that's going to have to be a focus. I'm not sure personally how we do things during the time we're off. I mean, the E-Board has certain emergency powers, but they're not going to hear something like this. I imagine we could certainly arrange to have an off-session hearing with enough notice to the members and whoever has to call in from their jaunt to Paris. You just have to do it, but we'll have to see. So thank you so much. Do you have any questions of us before you go?
Thanks again for your interest in all this. It feels good to have partners at the state level. I know that we all feel this way, that we can turn to you all and say, oh my gosh, something unexpected just happened. And we know that you would be.
Well, we do have we have an advantage in that, A, this committee is quite functional, if I do say so. And second, actually, housing is quite interestingly it's bipartisan, if not tripartisan. Of course, there are nuances and differences, but it gives us an advantage. It's the reason that the first version of the House bill got out unanimously from the House. So, and the Senate bill isn't that different, and it dovetails with us. So we'll see. Thank you, everybody. Really have a good afternoon. Members of the committee, what do you got your finger over the forget it? Okay. After I say the A word, which I have not yet said, tomorrow, we're going to start at 9 o'clock.
9 a.m.
And we have all morning, we have various bills being introduced and then the floor, and we'll see. At the moment, we do not have anything scheduled for after the floor. This is kind of an unpredictable time because you've seen how short some of the floor sessions are, but then we're gonna have voting on some very controversial bills. So we're just gonna have to watch the schedule, check in with us, the leadership here in Magali, and we'll just see how it goes. Any other statements, thoughts before you go home and cry in your drinks?